If you choose to live in a certain way, life can be a straight line. You learn, you earn, and you retire, and that's just the way it is. But what if I told you most people, including me, don't live life in a straight line? The way it is simply doesn't work for many of us. In fact, the educate, work and retire model is something that's more akin to an industrial generation in an industrial economy, and actually we live in a brand new, more complex, more sophisticated environment. So in this video, I want to talk about the 5 reasons why the conventional retirement model is broken, and the 5 things we need to do to break away from our conventional perception of retirement and define our own version of success in the next chapter of our lives. Welcome to What Happens Next. Let me tell you about my Uncle Jimmy. Jimmy, like many men of his generation, went to work in a factory in a large East London-based industrial sugar manufacturer in an era when a lot of people had one employer throughout their career. Now, Jimmy started working for this employer and after a few decades had built up a really decent final salary pension. And along with the fact that he'd stopped enjoying the work quite a while ago, he decided to retire early. Initially, Jimmy loved retirement. No early starts, complete freedom of time, less stress, then boredom set in. And Jimmy needed a daily routine. And unfortunately, that routine primarily was situated around the pub. Now, I've got a vendetta against pubs, by the way. I have been known to frequent a few pubs myself. However, I'm not convinced a daily visit to the pub is conducive to a good retirement. Jimmy died in his late 60s, and I've got to be really careful here because correlation isn't always causation. And these situations are always a lot more complex and nuanced than this simple short story. However, thinking about our purpose, identity, community, physical health, and all of those things which should play a part in our thinking about the next chapter of our lives, Jimmy didn't do, I believe we need to learn from. Now, whilst Jimmy was unique, his story isn't. And I've heard from loads of people who have relatives who have told me stories like this. So is the conventional model of educate, work, retire actually working for our lives, and what do we need to think about when we're thinking about our next chapter? Because we all know people who have experienced those gaps in the next chapter of their lives. The dad and granddad who have retired and since they've been retired have become more withdrawn and depressed. The mum and nan who fill their time by visiting the same 3 supermarkets every single day. I don't know about you, but that version of Groundhog Day is not one I want to live when I change my life in the next chapter. You see, I'd suggest the model of learn, earn, and then stop, whilst might have been sort of appropriate for the industrial generation, doesn't work as well today. And when I said it worked for the industrial generation, bear in mind that during that period of industrial revolution, living standards went up, there was more financial security, the factories got workers, but the reality is we do not live in that industrial generation anymore. And here's the reasons I think the model of conventional retirement simply doesn't suit us today. Let's start with one that you probably know. Most of us are living longer, healthier lives. By 2054, there's research to say that the number of centenarians, people living up to 100, will quadruple in the next 30 years. Life expectancy has gone from the early 70s in Western countries, and primarily that's America and the UK, to the early to mid 80s in the past 30 years. Many of us are living for another 10 to 15 years after our conventional retirement age, and a decent chunk of us live for another 30. So if many of us are living for at least another 10 to 15 years more than we expected, and actually many more are living for another 25 to 30 years, it's easy to see why we need to think differently about the next chapter of our lives we conventionally call retirement, as the likelihood of that being twice, 3 or 4 times longer than we expect means that we need to look at it differently. So does the fact that retirement now be a lot longer than we expect change how we view it? I'd suggest so. Not only have you got to consider and factor that into your financial plan because the money's got a lot longer, we also need to think about maintaining our other areas of well-being for a longer period of time too. Which moves me on to my second point. A lot of people of conventional retirement age are choosing to continue to work. Now that's not always for the money, but it might be for a combination of the money and the mental stimulation, social connection and sense of contribution. Things work can provide to us which are all beyond the paycheck. A lot of the clients I work with have decided that work provides non-financial benefits to their lives, which often means they choose to continue. And they're probably right to do so. Cognitive decline and social isolation have negative factors on our lives, and sometimes these holes can be filled by continued work. Having that social connection at work and actively being intellectually engaged and using your brain every day can fill some of those gaps. So you may have reached an age where people conventionally retire, but you want all of the other benefits work provides, including a feeling where you're continuing to contribute to the world and using your brain. We talk quite a bit on What Happens Next about looking at well-being from a holistic perspective. And I suppose my question is, does continued work in whatever way works for you contribute to that holistic well-being for you? Now the good news is we've got a free quiz you can do on the What Happens Next website, www.whathappensnext.life, for free right now. Now there's a link in the comments directly to the quiz. If you're watching this on a screen and you've got your phone, feel free to click the QR code. But our aim and aspiration for you to take the quiz is it allows you to hold up a mirror to where you're strong from a well-being perspective today and the areas where you might want to do a bit of work so that you can make positive change in your own life. Let me move on to my third point. One size fits all cookie cutter retirement simply doesn't work for us anymore. We live in a completely different world than we did a few decades ago. Most of us don't have jobs for life, guaranteed final salary pensions, or even a desire to simply stop work at a particular point in time. I've talked about this before, but the cookie cutter retirement model wasn't designed for working people. It was designed for the needs of growth for the Industrial Revolution. It was designed for the offices and the factories as opposed to the people who worked within it. And if we look at that point as bluntly as possible, retirement was designed to help older people move out of the workforce so that these industries and offices could get younger people in. Now we live in a completely different economic and cultural environment from when a conventional retirement was invented, with technology being a huge driver for this change. So for me, this means that if we're in a different economic and cultural environment in the majority of the Western world, we do need to rethink the nature of a conventional retirement. The fourth point I want to make is if you're at retirement age and you leave the workforce, society loses out on everything you can bring it and the economy, but also the people of the younger generations coming through. Society will probably benefit from your wisdom, your input, your knowledge. And if you retire, the potential contribution you can make to society, to a certain extent, might be lost. We benefit from learning so much over our decades on Earth. Lessons we can share with the next generation. Skills and knowledge we could transfer to the younger generation. Many of my clients, after officially retiring, have gone back to consult, train younger people, work as NEDs, work as charity trustees. They're all routes that you can take when you're thinking about the next chapter. I think if you're thinking about the next chapter of your life, one question I'd consider asking yourself is, what can I contribute to the next generation or the generation before that? For many of my clients, thinking about the knowledge, skills and experience they could impart to the younger generations was enough to keep them from a conventional retirement, but contributing, and this is the important bit, on their terms. My fifth and final reason why I believe a conventional retirement model might be a bit broken is that the pace of change is faster now than it's ever been, and it's making us rethink a lot in our lives. The interesting thing I believe about technological change, AI, and everything else changing in our lives is it does make us rethink the assumptions we use, including whether a conventional retirement still works for us. We've known for thousands of years, as philosopher Heraclitus talked about, the only constant is change. The reality, however, is the pace of change has never been swifter, which means the way we look at so much of our lives is changing too. So the good news is we've got way more choice than ever before. The not so good news is choice often can be overwhelming. But here's a video that talks about the paradox of choice and how to cope with making those choices. And not that you need any more choice in your life, but in this video I talk about the 12 places you should consider if you're thinking about retirement to travel to today. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon.